What's up, boys and girls, and horror movie Scream fanatics? I am Keith, aka Bored Now, and on this video I will be reviewing Scream 4 from 2011, the last Scream to be directed by Wes Craven, the late great Wes Craven, and the last, for the moment anyway, to be written by Kevin Williamson. He's a producer on the new film Scream 5. And as I record this review, we are just days away from Scream 5 being released. In fact, I think in some areas there's already previews that have been out, and it's starting to get some buzz online anyway. And so far the buzz has been very good. The online reviews have been very strong, with some hinting that it may even be the best sequel, which might be saying something, but there you have it, some good buzz for Scream 5, and we'll get to that later in the week. I just want to say a quick shout out to my regular horror movie review partner, Rachel McDonald. Sadly, she can't be with me to record this today. Unfortunately, she has been infected by the virus. Sorry to say that. It's horrible news, but this review does go out to Rachel. I didn't know how to say that properly, so I apologise. But sadly, yes, she does have the virus. So this review goes out to Rachel and a speedy recovery. And I look forward to be terrible English. Look forward to talking horror movies with her again soon on this channel, and I'm sure before we're done with the Scream franchise there will be more discussions, at least a recap on Scream 5 and the rest of it. So Scream 4 for the time being, just me doing this one solo, and it's the third time I've seen this movie. I saw it for the first time in cinemas. I didn't think much of it at the time. And then I saw it a few years ago, a rewatch, and I actually thought it was more solid. So what did I think this time? Well, I guess about the same is the truth. It's definitely a step up on Scream 3, and I think there's a pretty solid time to be had, but obviously I much prefer the original Scream, and I much prefer Scream 2, although it's not actually that close, that far apart. I think this is a very solid sequel with some obvious problems. So the premise is that Sidney Prescott is back in Woodsboro because she has written a book on the events of the earlier films. So she's back in town to promote that. Alison Brie is her publicist. And of course, there's a new Ghostface killer who targets her, but targets her family in particular. She has a cousin, Jill, who lives in town, played by Emma Roberts, who virtually unknown when this movie came out. And she becomes the target as well. So Sydney feels very protective of her cousin. And so it becomes a very personal thing. There you have Gail back, you have Dewey back, and you also have a bunch of new characters like Judy Hicks, for example, who is at this point a rookie detective, rookie cop, who is sort of under the tutelage of Dewey. You have, in Scream fashion, a couple of film geeks, but one way they update the franchise in this film is to have them be live streamers on the internet. So they're desperate to get the scoop and desperate to get some meaty stuff for their live stream. One of them wears a little weird sort of headset, and there's a bunch of other characters. As I said, Jill's the main. Along with Sydney's, I guess she becomes the main final girl style character, and then she has a couple of friends. She has Kirby, who's quite sort of savvy and smart, and almost like the film nerd of that group, if you like. There's a group of 3 of them, and as I said, a series of other characters. Judy Hicks, who, as we know, is returning for Scream 5. But let's just talk about the opening to this film, because the opening, I really take to. I really enjoy it. I think it's very smart. I know it's not for everyone. Some people have taken against it, but the opening when you get like two stab movies before we actually get to the actual first proper kill of Scream 4, Freudian slip. So it's like a film within a film within a film. So we open with a couple of girls and they're basically killed, or one of them's killed. Ghostface shows up, but that's like the trailer to like Stab 6 or something. And then we cut to another pair of girls, Veronica Mars herself, and the lead out of True Blood. So we have Kirsten Bell, and we have Anna Paquin. I'm sorry, but two really great actresses. And it turns out that they're in Stab 7, and like the characters are then watching that. So you get two sort of fake outs. You actually see Stab 6, or like a trailer for Stab 6, and then Stab 7 before we get to like the real opening of Scream 4. So it sort of throws you for a loop, and I really like it. And there's some smart references and dialogue flying about in this. You get like a Twilight Zone reference at one point. You get this really smart discussion between like Anna Paquin and Kirsten Bell's character, where they're debating the merits of like American horror movies versus like Asian like horror movies. And I really like that. That feels like at the time a very like intelligent, smart conversation to be had. And those two actresses really give it their all in their scene. And there's a couple of nice kill style moments. So I personally really enjoyed that opening, and it's my second favourite opening of a Scream movie. Obviously, I don't think you're ever going to beat, the iconic, shocking opening of the original Scream, but I would put the opening of Scream 4 as my number 2 favourite opening. Now, just speaking of some of the set pieces, I do think they're very hit and miss, and one thing that lets this film down is like the kills themselves. The kills just feels like disposable and throwaway. And we've reached the point in the Scream movies now where Ghostface just feels less threatening, and that's something which obviously is a challenge for Scream 5 to try and recapture the sense of danger, the sense of threat with Ghostface, because here it's got to the stage where he just doesn't have that menace or that sort of that threat anymore, basically. And it just feels a little bit like they're going through the motion with some of the direction, some of the set pieces, and at times it just get kind of repetitive and a little bit drawn out, because there's a scene at one point where in the barn where people are getting like attacked, and they're holding like, it's the film nerds who are holding like this film festival. I mean, come on, what a dumb place to hold a film festival, in a barn. And visually it just looks kind of like crap and grimy, and that scene is like really bad. I mean, I don't know about badly directed. It might be just what's in the scene itself. But this film in general feels like it's going through the motions a bit. And there's just too much going on in that scene. And it, rather than adding to the suspense, it like takes away from it, I think. So the barn scene is definitely an example of this. Overall, the kills don't stand out in the way that they do stand out in the earlier Scream films. So I guess one of the better ones is the parking lot kill with Alison Brie's character, who's, as I said, is Sydney's like agent. And I was sad to see her go, because I love Alison Brie. She's like really entertaining when she's in the film. She has like a nice rub up against Gale Weathers at one point as well, where they sort of get in each other's faces, and Gail like gets the best of it, and she like skips out the scene almost. Yeah, still got it. Still a bit of a bitch. So there's some good exchanges, like, but that's a good death scene actually. Her in the parking lot, because I think there's a little bit of a hint she could be like a ghost face before she's dead. And I wish Alison Brie stuck around longer because I just enjoy her so much. But that's a pretty good death, like the way that scene's directed, and there's some good tension, there's some good like thrill to the scene, and the death looks pretty convincing and good to see. But there's mostly the deaths are pretty forgettable, so that drags the film down a fair bit for me. I'll talk about some of the characters. It's a weird one. I think for the most part, the new characters they introduce are pretty good. Kirby's like a standout for me because I sort of like how she is like knowledgeable about films and knows her stuff, but she also doesn't feel too much like an entertaining or over the top sort of like geek nerd. It sort of feels like, hey, yeah, this girl's grounded and she's got a life and she's sensible and she's just very savvy and smart, and you take her seriously, and I think the actress does a good job. And there's like a group of three of them, her, Jill, and the other gal whose name I've forgotten at the moment. She's, I think, the weakest of the three out of that trio. Emma Roberts does a good job as Jill, although I'll talk about what happens with her in a moment, because it's this weird sort of thing where the film's juggling like different characters. And I think because of that, although in theory Jill's the final gal, wink wink, but it doesn't quite... It turns out that she doesn't have that much screen time, so it's sort of weird that when you see the direction of her character at the end of the film, I think she comes into her own as a performer in those scenes. Like, she really goes for those scenes. It's almost like they shook up the character and she reacted and was suddenly given more to do. The people who return, like David Arquette, Courtney Cox, Neve Campbell, they're on good form. I think they're consistently watchable. Gail's very entertaining as always. You get like this mini feud between her and Judy at some point, and you've got that whole famous thing of Judy making like Dewey's like squares, and lemon squares, and the famous line from Gail, which has become a whole internet phenomenon, I should say, your lemon squares taste like arse, which is a fantastic line. I think I was a bit worried we were going to get some sort of goofy love triangle with those three, but they actually didn't play up that side too much, and it just ended being a bit like fun comic relief. And you get some good stuff planted with Judy in this film, which obviously they can continue on to Scream 5 now. And there's a scene where she almost dies near the end, and the actress does a good job, but I think I would say mostly the new characters are good. I would say Kirby and Judy are the best of the new characters in this film. I think one of the things that was a bit weird for me at the time is because this did look to be a sort of a soft reboot for the time, and that they intended there to be obviously more Scream films. So they're introducing these new characters. Now, in the end, it didn't happen because Scream 4 was a disappointment at the box office. So it's taken all these years later, more than 10 years later, to get the fifth Scream, sadly without Wes Craven. But I think it was just a bit weird for me watching this at the time, where you have characters who are introduced, and with more films in mind, and yet they sort of get killed off like they're nothing. They're sort of whittled away. So it just seemed a bit strange for me at the time, because that would mean that they would have to then introduce a bunch of new characters when you have Scream 5, which obviously now we've got, but it's much later in any case. And I think it's a big question moving forward now with a new team on Scream 5, because obviously there is a plan to do more films and maybe a trilogy with this team, and obviously you can't rely on the same names forever or the same formula, which is probably another reason why the Scream films over time have got a bit repetitive. And I think Scream 4 definitely suffers from this, and it's because mostly, apart from Scream 3, I guess that followed a different sort of path, but you've sort of had the same sort of plot mostly, with a few changes, and obviously you have different scenes, but the actual plot and the premise of each Scream film is pretty much the same. And so I think it just becomes the law of diminishing returns by the time you get into like the fourth and that amount of sequels. And that's what I mean about Scream 4 just going through the motions. And it's a challenge which Scream 5 has, because it could just become another nostalgia sequel that plays up the old routines a bit too much. Because a good example in this film is the weakest character of the film for me was definitely Trevor, who's like Jill's boyfriend, and they sort of flag him up as being another suspect, like another Billy type or another Derek type, and he's just so bland, the character. He just has no personality, and there's no tension, there's no drama. They don't really give him enough time and enough of a backstory for you to really care and be that interested. And it just stands out so much that they're just doing a rehash of the storyline from Scream 1 and a little bit from Scream 2. And Trevor's just so boring that you just don't care about it. I think that is my main complaint. My two main complaints with Scream 4 is then, one, it feels too much of a rehash of the older films, and the other one being that the kills just aren't that great. I would say Alison Brie's kill in the parking lot is the best of them. Now the ending is very interesting because they go for this surprise. Also, I mean, actually maybe Kirby's kill is pretty good. They do this smart sort of nod to the first Scream film, but they do subvert it in that scene. They do something a bit different with it, because one of the film nerds, played by Rory Culkin, he gets tied up by Ghostface, or appears to get tied up. And this has come previously because he's been like hitting on or flirting with Kirby for a long time. And they finally get it together, like they have a moment, and so it sort of at least makes you invested in that, because you're quite invested in Kirby, or at least I was. So it adds a bit of drama to that whole scene, and it turns out to be a trick. Like, he turns out to be one of the ghost faces, him and Jill. That's the whole reveal. Jill, of course, Sydney's cousin. And what happens is, I mean, his motivation I thought was a bit lame, because it's like it boils down to him being jealous, or not him being jealous, or him just being mad with her for all those years rejecting him. You know, we've been in the same class all those years and you only finally noticed me. I just find that a bit lame and a bit like soap opera type thing. It doesn't feel that it's enough to warrant him becoming a killer. Also, they've sort of gotten together at this point anyway, so that sort of ruins that explanation a bit, but I guess at that point he's committed. Jill's motivation is like more interesting because her whole thing is that it's a bit cliched again, but it sort of fits in with the sort of like ideas that Scream has played with over the years. Is then she's like jealous of Sydney's like fame and that she's getting all the attention. And I mean, it is a bit cliche, but it sort of works in the scene well enough, and there's some good explanation and backstory. So they do the reveal of it. They do make a couple of like effective, effective like Ghostface, because I think he's like very sort of deadpan and has like a mood to him, and Jill. Emma Roberts really comes into her own when like she's revealed as Ghostface, and I think has a lot of charisma, a lot of like bite and energy. But the whole thing that they go for, which I think they miss the boat a little bit at the end, is then Jill has like injured Sydney. And Sydney knows that Jill's a ghost face, but no one else does. So it gets to this whole thing where Jill's whole reasoning is that she wants to be a celebrity, and so she sort of gets that moment where they wheel her out on a stretcher, and the press are all there, and the lights are flashing from the cameras, and it's a really well directed scene, and you just sort of wonder if they should have ended the film there and just had an open ending, because obviously they might have gotten to her a bit later, like they might have caught her in the end. Obviously Sydney knows, but at this point she doesn't know that Sydney survives. But it's one of these where I think by having that ending, it would have been a bit bolder and a bit more daring. Now, they still make the point well enough in any case, and the stuff in the hospital where you get this big sort of end scene with the rest of them where Jill's finally killed, I can't complain too much because there's some entertaining stuff in that last bit. But I just wondered, it might just be this thing where it's a Scream movie and there's certain expectations, and maybe it would have felt a bit unsatisfying to have left it open-ended like that. And, you know, someone made a point to me online like earlier this week that if you look at the other Scream movies, they always end up getting Ghostface, and Ghostface never lives. So I get all that. I just wish maybe they'd done something a bit bolder, a bit more open-ended, that subverted the expectation a little bit. Obviously Scream is known for subverting things, so that's I think it could have ended up being even more satisfying, but I understand the other argument as well. So overall, I think Scream 4 is a really solid sequel. I do have a good time watching it. It's just certain things. There's some good new characters. There's a couple of characters who are a bit disposable and throwaway. Trevor, definitely the biggest one. The kills aren't that great, although I do really like the opening. There's some smart pop culture referencing going on once again, and it definitely has its moments. It's a much more solid film than Scream 3, and I think you do have these, to me anyway, I'm quite level-headed when it comes to my expectations from now on, because obviously they do follow a set formula, so I just accept that there is going to be, as time goes on, that maybe they're going to struggle to really live up to the earlier films. So as far as Scream sequels go, as when you get to Scream 4, then I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10, this one, which I would take, but moving into Scream 5, there's a hope that this is a new chapter and they'll do something to freshen things up. But for now, I'll give Scream 4 a 6 out of 10. So solid stuff overall. Some pretty good new characters. So there you have it. That's Scream 4. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Like and subscribe as always. You can also support me on Patreon at patreon.com/borednow. Just throw a little bit of money my way to support me. You get some perks on there. And as I said, fingers crossed, Rachel. It won't be too long till Rachel McDonald returns and we can talk some Scream and talk some other horror movie stuff. And another thing I'll do, because we're now very much in the run-up to Scream 5, is I will record a separate video where I'll discuss my feelings going into that new Scream film, my feelings when it comes to predictions and various things that might happen with it. So I'll record that separately and get it out before Scream 5. So just talking a bit about Scream 5 and what my plans are, I will do a spoiler-free review for Scream 5, and that'll be not long after I've seen it, and just some thoughts fresh from the cinema on Friday. And then later on I'll do a non-spoiler review, a spoiler review, a full-on review. Hopefully, fingers crossed, at some point Rachel will be back and we'll be able to talk Scream 5 and the franchise overall. I think we'll do another ranking video like we did with the Halloween movies. But that's my thoughts on Scream 4, and I'll see you again soon with some Scream 5 talks. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.